There we go. And we've got a collection of people that are just signing up. So Harriet, Kieran, welcome and thank you. And we'll give everybody a few minutes. I think when you start a webinar, you're like, right, ready to go, but you recognize that people need a moment to sign up and sign in and join us. Kieran, you're joining us. Is that a dog? A cat? I can't quite see in the back.
We have two dogs that like spending their time right next to me on the couch. So if you see something moving, it's not a, it's just a puppy.
Just checking whether that was a leader and employee experience for McDonald's, because Harriet also has a dog that is presumably also an expert in working from home.
She is. I mean, we can see my hand moving. It's because she's right next to me being like, is it not time for dinner yet? When is it time for dinner?
Nearly. Well, the problem is we're talking about a number of things, including McDonald's. So we just have to make sure that we say the word hamburger, but don't say it too often, or meat.
She does recognize it.
Yeah, right. Well, I think maybe what we'll do is we've still got people joining bit by bit, but I think it's a good moment to just kick off and start introductions so that we all know who everybody is on the line. A quick reminder that we've got a poll that people have been asked that we'll talk about a little bit later. And my goal, as ever, is that we have a really good conversation and see where it goes, but we make sure that we've got time at the end for questions. For those who don't know me, my name is Emma Sinclair, and I am the CEO of Enterprise Alumni. And we have here today Kieran Layton, who is the Director of Employer Brand Strategy at McDonald's and is a member of the US People Leadership Team. We'll be digging into him in a second, and also a little bit of recollecting my younger years as an alumni of McDonald's. And then we have Harriet Minter, who's a journalist and broadcaster, and she specializes in the future of work, leadership, and working from home. So I guess my idea today for both of you, before I kick off with a couple of questions, is employee experience can mean many things to many people, and I'm going to ask you that, but we've got a world where presumably McDonald's people need to come into work, and a world where, Harriet, you focused on people being at home. So Kieran, I might kick off, seeing as it's your job title. What does employee experience mean for you?
Yeah, so I think we've all heard or read many thoughts on how the pandemic's caused everyone's lines between work and personal to become very, very blurred, if not erased entirely. And for those in frontline roles who weren't able to work remotely, even at the height of the worst surges, work and in turn the employee's experience really shifted into this massive elephant in the room that even when those frontline workers weren't on duty, just the thought of the stress with the next shift or the constant feeling of unease driven by the pandemic also blurred those work-life lines as well. So really, I feel like we're at this point in society where the employee experience has been broadened to encompass not just those moments on the employee journey that directly involve the employer, but also those moments in between where how the employer defines the experience during those immediate interactions can have significant mental impact on an employee outside of work. And so it's a really interesting and tricky spot to design and plan for, because the other factor is that just as everything is changing so rapidly, so building the best employee experience in the now means having to cast a really, really wide net in a river versus a standing body of water like a pond, if everyone's tracking with the fishing analogy there.
Yeah, just making sure that all the water just made sense and I knew which part of it we were supposed, which boat we should be in. And I mean, Kieran, I'm making assumptions, right? But I am imagining that you have a lot of really young employees. I imagine, obviously at McDonald's, I mean, I was an alumni of McDonald's in the UK, you're McDonald's US. So there's just, I presume, a whole network of franchises. So it's not even like you've got one portion of head office or one portion of people in store. I presume you've got every age demographic, every geography. How do you even, before we dig into how do you even start to think about an employee experience when there's so many people of so many different ages who are mobile, starting out their careers all the way through to the very end of the working life cycle? That doesn't feel like a phrase like employee experience. That feels like a marathon.
Yeah, so we've all heard the phrase that you have to meet your user where they're at. And so in terms of both the younger generation, but also our older generations, you have to understand what their needs and expectations are, which as an elder millennial, in reference to the younger generations, I start to feel older and more perplexed at some of the current trends and tastes out there. But you have to get it and be able to speak the language of the demographic that you're trying to design for, to be able to authentically even have a starting point. So I think I would take this idea of meeting a generation or a target demographic where they're at. I would even take it a step further, and I say, come have them meet you wherever you are. And by that, I mean directly involve those who can provide an authentic perspective, whether it's Gen Z or your older boomer generations, because McDonald's, we're hiring all across the spectrum there. It's really understanding their needs in the planning and development process. So especially for Gen Z, these adults, and they are adults, they're quickly taking over more and more of the corporate workforce. So I would encourage everyone, it shouldn't be too difficult to leverage your internal younger resources. But if you don't have direct access to that Gen Z perspective via your current workforce, there are so many great agencies out there started by and led by Gen Z consultants, specifically for the reason of helping big companies like McDonald's or even the smaller companies understand how to best design and plan for their employee experience. Trendsetters is one. I don't know if anybody else has used them, but they're one that we've brought in to really help us along our journey of knowing that the desires and wants and needs are varying greatly and they're constantly changing, having them help us keep a pulse on what that moving target is.
Yeah, thank you. And Harriet, so Kieran talked about Gen Z, and there you are, having written a bestseller about working from home, which for Gen Me was inconceivable until a couple of years ago. How has this resonated with employers? Forget employees for a moment, because we're here to talk about employee experience. We're here to think about the beginning of the journey, during that journey, when that journey should end. But I mean, working from home, how can a company even contemplate employee experience when people are physically far away and often haven't even met their employer?
Oh, that's such a great question. I mean, I think what the pandemic has thrown up actually is the difference between employers who understood employee experience and those who didn't. Right? And those who understood things like, actually, if we've suddenly sent half our workforce home, we need to make sure that they have the correct technology to be able to access the workspace. We need to make sure that they have strong Wi-Fi. We need to think about actually what's going on with their mental health. How is this impacting them? Those were the employee experience. What we actually see with this is when, as an employer, you don't get it, that's when you run into trouble. So when you don't understand that actually how it feels to work for you when you are not in the office is different in good and bad ways than when you are in the office with people, and thinking about how you can replicate some of that. That's the interesting part, right? How do we replicate those relationships, that closeness, that ability to collaborate when we're not all in the same space all of the time? And particularly now as we go from pandemic into actually the return to the office in a kind of hybrid world, how do we create things? I think this must be something, Kieran, that you're really thinking about, like, how do we create fairness, right? If we're saying actually some of our employees can work from home, but some of them, we need them on the ground, how do we make that feel fair? How do we ensure that people feel that they are equally invested in and that the company cares about them in the same way? All of those things are really, when we're talking about employee experience, that's the stuff that as an employer, I think you should be thinking about. It's how you are making your employees feel and the relationship you are building or not with them.
Yeah, that's a great point, Harry. And I mean, Kieran, please, absolutely do comment on how do we ensure that employees feel that's fair? Because I presume the bulk of your workforce are physically required in stores. What does the demographic actually look like?
Yeah, so I think right now we're approaching, 43% of what we would consider a Gen Z demographic, which would make up the crew and manager population in our restaurants in the US. But yeah, Harriet touched on a really, really important point. It's about listening because I think there's a lot of companies out there, and McDonald's might be guilty of this, that I think for many, many years, we assumed we knew what our crew wanted, or we assumed we knew what would be best for them, whether it was in terms of benefits or establishing the best kind of restaurant culture in the restaurants in the United States. And I think what the pandemic helped us all do is really just take a forced step back and say, all right, now that people is front and center in all of these conversations, how should we best approach this? And for us, that started with listening, really active listening, not just through survey mechanisms, but also through really qualitative feedback via focus groups and everything. Because when you're designing something for the scale of a company like McDonald's, there's definitely no one size fits all approach. And so being able to understand how you can provide personalized and customized experiences whenever possible at the scale of almost 1 million workers across the US, that was the challenge that we continue trying to solve on a daily basis, but it's what keeps us going.
That's just blown my mind, actually, Kieran. Like that, like, how do we personalize it for 1 million workers? That's amazing.
Well, there's a question there for you, Kieran. I mean, how do you, right? And how do you, we spent all this time talking about lifelong relationships, but also that it's an employees market. There's a lot of choice out there. I mean, how do you approach that? How do you become the employer of choice for the generation that you want to attract?
Yeah, well, I guess I'll start by saying we were crying into our Happy Meals for many nights trying to figure this out. But seriously, though, it was extremely difficult in the beginning. And I know the staffing challenges that we're facing at McDonald's right now, those are not just limited to the quick service restaurant industry. This was an issue even before the pandemic began. But I think after a few months in, we realized the timing was perfect to finally try to launch an employee value proposition for the US business. Now, if you're unfamiliar with McDonald's business model, we are a franchise company and do not own 93% of the approximate 14,000 restaurants in the United States. So that means that we're not able to dictate the people practices in 93% of the restaurants in the US. We can consult and recommend as a company, but at the end of the day, our owner-operators are independent business owners, and they maintain ownership of their people practices. So it makes launching large-scale initiatives with consistent and enthusiastic adoption really, really difficult. Now, with this being said, we knew that there was a huge opportunity in showing the system what good looked like when it came to people. We had and have many franchisees doing incredible things in the space of people for their organizations, but we needed to get everybody to the same baseline so we could really start rocking and rolling when it came to our people ambitions. We've been using a phrase a lot recently that we are only as good as our weakest franchisee. And so launching this EVP work, it was all about, all right, let's get everybody up to that same level, the same starting level at the very minimum. So with the employee value proposition work that we did, we looked at many companies' EVP efforts, and we saw how they were talent attraction focused, which definitely is a big consideration and a bucket of work in any EVP effort. But for McDonald's, we used our employee value proposition initiative as a framework to show our franchisees, this is what great people practices look like. Here's what you absolutely should be doing, and here's what would separate you from your competitors. And we built the program with them hand in hand, so it felt like a true collaboration. So we activated our EVP work and had it nationally endorsed by our operator leadership teams and then every single market in the country. So what this work has truly done beyond all the tactical elements of it, it's elevated people within our business and how it's talked about and invested in at every level of the business, both from the company side of things for our franchisees, even for our suppliers, because we commonly use the image of the three-legged stool to show how important each of those elements are in maintaining the successful business. So it's unfortunate that it took this long in a pandemic for us to get to this point, but I do know that many other companies may be in the same boat where people doesn't quite get the internal attention that it should. And I'm here to tell you that if we could do it at McDonald's with our franchisees, you absolutely can too.
Yeah, the phrase employee experience, I think about when I started work, and I'm not that old, but that just was not something anyone talked about, and now it's not something that anyone can not talk about. A question, Harriet, for you. I guess young people, we often say they're looking for ethics, they're looking at the brand of the company they're thinking of working for. It's not just the pay. What about the employee perspective, which I know you spent a lot of time thinking about? What, from your research, are employees looking for in employer brand, and what is that narrative that's most compelling or necessary that you need to give people so they feel like you really want to build that relationship with them?
So you touched on it there, right? Which is when we talk about Gen Z, and I always hesitate to put a whole generation in bracket, but let's do it anyway because it's fun. When we talk about Gen Z, they care about ethics, they care about sustainability, they care about how you treat your people. And what's really new, I think, for this generation that we saw a little bit for the last one, but it's just rocketed, is that they are not getting their information about your company from you. They are getting their information about your company from social media, from their peers, from what people are writing on anonymous forums. They are gathering that information and making a decision about your company before they have got to the point of even applying with you. And so for employers, that means you really have to think about your employer brand. You have to think about what people are saying about you when you're not in the room. And you have to think about how you can make yourself present in those spaces in ways that feels authentic and natural to the people consuming it, right? So it's no point kind of showing up on TikTok and being like, here we are, and we're a very, very old school corporate, and we're going to make a TikTok video about that, because nobody's gonna buy it. But you can think about actually who are the people there that we can engage with, who are the people that can be the brand ambassadors for us, who are the people that we can learn from and talk to and try and understand what they're looking for. So see it as a conversation rather than a broadcast, which I think is generally how we've kind of treated employer branding a bit. And then the other thing is really understanding that, there is, much like dating, there is someone out there for everyone, right? There is a company out there for everyone. Your company is not right for everyone. Not everyone is right for your company, and that is okay. So actually kind of owning what your values are and what your beliefs are and how you want to work and what is right for your business, own that. And there are people out there who will want that. So we saw that, at kind of midway through the pandemic when Goldman Sachs said, this is it. I just want to tell you, working from home is an aberration. And the second this is over, everyone will be back to the office. And you know what? Most of the people who work there were like, yeah, great, bring it on. And we would have said that Generation Z would be like, absolutely not. We want freedom, we want flexibility, but not the people they were hiring, because they were hiring the right people for their business. And that's the understanding, is understanding actually like, can we just really own what our business wants? Because the trouble you're going to get yourself into is if you pretend it wants something else, and then people come and work for you, and then actually that's not what they're getting. And they leave and they tell a different story. What you want is actually for people, that whole life cycle, that whole employee life cycle, to know the story, to be telling the same story that you are.
Yeah,
and Harriet,
please.
Oh, Emma, I was going to say, if I could respond to that, because Harriet, that was such a great insight, and you touched on something that we've been grappling with, is just this idea of owning your narrative when it comes to your employer brand and how people are perceiving you as an employer. And I know I'm not going to shy away from it. McDonald's has definitely received media attention in the past for certain things, but what we've been talking about internally is how we can start telling the story of all of the incredible things that we're doing with our for our people. We've had a program called Archways to Opportunity that provides college tuition assistance, which has been a longstanding program, at least for the past 5 or 6 years now. And it's an incredible program with great adoption. But what we're looking for more opportunities like that to show this is how we're taking care of people at McDonald's. Because another thing that Harriet touched on is everything is moving so fast right now. I mentioned earlier that employer brand is a moving target, and sometimes with social media, and especially with TikTok, with the quickness of it, perception can change so rapidly. And so it's about how we as a company can try to get ahead of that and build genuine, organic moments and that feel authentic to the viewers who are watching them. And that's, I think, one of the first steps in controlling your narrative from a people perspective.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, to take Harriet's point that you want to attract the right people for you, which I think is a really important thing, right? You can't please everybody, and we all know that. And I guess a question first to you, Kieran, which is, what are some of the challenges for you in creating an sort of very authentic employer brand to attract the right people? Because if you've got 1 million people, that mind-blowing statistic that Harriet and I are still recovering from, you know, do you want to attract everyone? Do you want them to find their own way and find their right role in McDonald's? How do you approach that at such volume?
Yeah, it's a great question. And we've done a lot recently to help guide our owner operators and give them the resources that they can help attract and retain the best talent out there. Now, for the QSR industry, that's going to look something very different than if you're hiring for a banking company or a financial services company, for example. But we still definitely do not want to adopt the mindset that we'll take anybody who comes in off the street. And so from a talent attraction standpoint, my colleague Alexa Morse, she has just done so much work taking all of the EVP work that we did, which we led with the foundational business practice element of it. And then she took it and ran with an agency partner to create this really, really compelling and authentic recruitment campaign that spoke to the talent that we're hoping to attract in the restaurants in a very, very real way that also felt true to the McDonald's brand. But I'm not going to lie, just the scale of everything that we have to do and the complexities of working through the franchise business model, it makes things really, really challenging. And so one thing that we've tried to combat that with is just ensuring that all of your stakeholders who could potentially have some type of perspective, whether it's talent attraction and recruiting, or just generally building out the people practices within the business, I don't think that there is such a thing as over collaboration at this point in our personal journey.
I wanted to add to that, Kieran. There's something as you were talking that made me think about, which is also that when we do that work, when we kind of invest the time and money in thinking about actually how do we make our employer branding really good, how do we make sure that employees feel really valued, like even if you can't get the answer immediately, even if it takes time and effort and lots of collaboration and, you know, getting people to buy in, the fact that you're doing it feels really good to employees. It's like, oh, hang on, you care about this. And it made me think of an ad campaign that ran here in the UK for McDonald's, and it was a recruitment campaign. And it was like, this is what we teach you. We teach you leadership, we teach you teamwork, we teach you collaboration. And I was like, this looks great, right? This looks like you're working there if you're ambitious and you've got ideas and you want to be going places and you've got discipline. And I thought, actually, if I was working there while that campaign was running, I would feel really proud of it. Like it. Yeah. So it's sort of a weird thing, which is you're even in the process of doing the work, even before you get to the answer, you're getting to the answer.
Yeah.
That pride is beautiful. I was going to say one thing, Kieran, to you, which I said before Harriet joined at the beginning of the call, which is I worked at McDonald's and it was formative, right? I still have my 5-star badge. Sometimes I know other alumni, they all keep it. Everyone says that it was really important, you know, whether it was time discipline because we were all 16-year-olds who had to rock up on time to get to work or whatever else it was. It actually was so important to so many people I know who are business leaders whose first experience of the workplace was that. So it is a real school. Speaking from personal experience.
And I think one of the biggest challenges that we had was making sure that at the start of this work, we knew that we had to keep all of our functional partners, our franchisees, we had to keep them excited and interested because it is really, really hard work. If there's anybody on this call looking down at the outset of some really big employee experience or employer brand work, it can feel really, really daunting, especially if you're very early on in your company's journey. And so one of the things that I always joked about at every step of the way is that we were part-time cheerleaders. Like, as much as we were designing this work and building these programs, it was also this big cheerleader function where we had to rally people around this common vision of where we wanted to get as an employer. The phrase that we commonly use was McDonald's wants to become not just a respected employer, but an admired one. And so it then becomes, as you start making progress on your journey, and it might be very, very slow, sometimes painful progress, just reminding people what that end vision is. And then that helps keep people motivated as you keep just making the right next best move at every step in the journey.
Yeah, I mean, it all resonates and it's all true, right? I mean, I don't know whether there was anyone else on the line today who was a McDonald's alumni, but I mean, there's quite a lot of people on the line, and we all, that's where we picked up those skills, and it's really good to hear you talk about that, right? And to look back, because I think to myself, would I suggest my teenagers went and worked at McDonald's? And I would, for lots of reasons, right? It's and that level of employee experience really matters because you feel it, and you carry it with you, I guess. And at the time, employee experience was very different for McDonald's when I worked there, which was quite a while ago. But I remember that there were people that really tried to encourage me to stay and go on to management. And they were just, and I think about how that must have evolved, and it's wonderful. I wanted to pick up on something Harriet said before, which was you used the phrase whole employee life cycle. And you both are obviously coming at employee experience from different perspectives. Obviously, we at Enterprise Alumni spend all our time thinking about maintaining and maximizing relationships with people who matter, but particularly former employees. And I spent an extremely long time spent so much time and energy and money and thought, retraining, recruiting, upskilling people, making sure that they have a good work environment, making sure they're proud of where they work, just to say thanks, bye when they leave. So, I mean, maybe I'll start with Harriet, because Kieran will have we'll probably take this from a sort of a corporate journey perspective. But Harriet, when you said employee life cycle, what did you mean about that? And when does employee experience stop for you?
Great question.
Loaded question, possibly, but I mean, it's a relevant question, right? We're living in an environment where everyone's struggling to hire. Boomerang hires is suddenly a phrase that everybody recognizes. Everybody wants to pull people back. And so, it's different to when I left the first job I had, my first sort of serious grown-up job, where it was like, you're dead to us, you've left. I don't think that that's the case anymore.
So I don't think it is the case anymore. So I talk about, when I do talks to people, one of the things I always mention is that, when we sort of started to think about the concept of employment as this kind of big life cycle thing, most of us were really working maybe 30 years. So you were sort of probably, like, if you think back 1940s, 1950s, you were coming into work after national service. So you're in the mid-20s. You were probably aiming to retire about 50. You'd be working your way out at that point. You'd probably be in the same place for the whole of that. I think we said this is not entirely real, but we say that, you moved around a lot less. Whereas now, the reality is that most of us are working for about 50 years, if we're lucky. It's probably going to have gone up by the time I get to that point. In that time, you could literally go from entry level to CEO 2 or 3 times in 2 or 3 different industries. So we can't think of it as just you get into a job, you stay there, you leave the job, you retire. What's happening instead is we're constantly moving. But what we found is that actually we move, the grass isn't always greener. So we're moving for things like, we're moving for more money, we're moving for promotion opportunities, we're moving to go and get that bit of experience or get that name on our CV. But actually, if you enjoy your job, if you like what you're doing, if you like the people you're working with, why wouldn't you come back at a higher level when you've been able to jump up a couple of grades? Why wouldn't you go to a competitor for a few years to get a bit more experience, or to a client for a few years to see what the other side is like, and come back again? And I think we're seeing that more and more. So we know that, I think it's so millennials are moving 4 times more than Gen X. There just aren't enough employees for us all to go around all of them all of the time. We've got to come back.
93% of millennials purportedly move for a promotion as well. And that happens within 2 years. It's just, how do you keep track of that? I mean, it's many questions for Kieran. I mean, how on earth do you keep track of that?
Well, the easy answer is right now we don't, just because it's a huge opportunity right now. McDonald's being one of the largest employers, not only in the US, but in the world, there is just such a massive built-in alumni group that I know right now we are not currently engaging with as much as we should, because there's so much power there, not just from the employee perspective, but I see that the alumni population is really where employee and consumer kind of intersect, because not only do you have an alumni population who you would hope would be great brand advocates for you from an employer brand perspective, but for a company like McDonald's, we also want to make lifelong customers. And so it's really, really important, not with how you're engaging with that alumni population, but making sure that that exit stage of the employee experience is really carefully curated and designed for. I mean, we might all have stories ourselves about just leaving one job and hoping that there was going to be an exit interview, and even if you're leaving on the most positive of terms, and being disappointed that there's nothing. It's kind of just like, oh, turn in your computer and then it's done. And so just the power in ensuring that final touch that a soon-to-be former employer has with you, who might be an employee again in the future if they become a boomerang employee. If you really make that exit stage moment a positive one, you are setting yourself up for success in both the customer and employee realms.
Yeah, well, I mean, and most companies are looking for employees, recruits, talent, and sales. And I mean, I think for lots of people, offboarding is a lost opportunity. In that regard, we've got a lot of alumni leaders on the line. That's the community we corral. And obviously you've talked, Kieran, about, the importance of the employee and consumer intersection. But I mean, how does that actually impact the employee value proposition, company brand for the people that are there? I mean, do you think of them as two separate groups? Because ultimately, maybe when you leave, you feel different. Maybe you don't care about the company as much. You maybe stay in touch with people. Is it part of the same package? Does the alumni portion impact on, I mean, I'm going to share some statistics actually in a minute, but how do those two communities interact for company brand and employer branding?
Yeah, so from my perspective, and Harriet, I would love to hear your perspective on this as well, but I think it's a really important piece of the puzzle. I think when you're beginning your employer brand journey, one of the very first things that you should be doing is listening to your people, and your people should be brought in to include not just the current employees at your company, but your former employees, as well as the potential talent that you might be looking to attract by enhancing employer brand. Because when you look at those three pieces of the puzzle and you put them together, there might be, and there what likely will be, some overlap in terms of what they're providing you with the feedback and insights, but there might be some differentiation, which means you have a broader group to design for. And so I think that they absolutely should be included in the equation when you're thinking about how to incorporate those viewpoints at any point in your employer brand journey. Yeah, Harry, would love to hear your thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, I absolutely echo there what you say about that kind of that wider viewpoint, which is so important, right? You can't expect somebody in your employ who is reliant on you for their rent that month and their bills the next month to give you an entirely honest answer of what's going on within your organization, right? Once they've left and they're no longer reliant on you, they tend to be much more honest. So that's really important in itself. But also, I think there is this idea, which is, we know for humans, the thing that we love the most is community. We love community. And when we have been part of a community, it's kind of heartbreaking to leave it. Even if we wanted to leave, even if we're going on to something amazing and great, the thing that you feel when you leave a job is that kind of, maybe I'm sad to be leaving my colleagues, and maybe I'm not sad to be leaving my boss, but I probably am quite sad to be leaving John, who I had lunch with every Wednesday. It's that community that I think if we can find a way to keep that community alive, what that does then for the employer is it keeps that warmth of feeling. And it goes back to that point I made earlier about, what's being said about you when you're not in the room. Like, your ex-employees are the people that say to their mates, you should go and work there, I had a really good time. Or actually, that person is a really amazing person to work for. You want them on your CV. Go be part of it. Like, keeping that warmth of feeling that you have invested in them while they've been in your employ. That to me feels priceless. Why wouldn't you want to do it?
Yeah, straightforward human connection. I have a couple more questions I'd love to ask, but at this point, we've got 25 minutes left. If we've got questions that people want to ask, do put them into the Q&A and I will field them and I will ask them to Kieran and to Harriet, depending on who they most suit. Harriet, I wanted to ask you, look, it's an inevitability for lots of the people on the line that a lot of their workforce have moved to a hybrid workplace environment.
Yeah.
Is that a positive or negative impact on employee brand? I mean, we know we've got work to do either way. What's your feedback in that regard? I
mean, I think if you can move to a hybrid environment, you have the opportunity for that to be a positive impact on your employer brand, right? You have the opportunity. And I say that because you could move to a hybrid work environment, do it really badly, everyone hates it, all they talk about is how terrible it is to work for you and the whole thing's gone horribly wrong, yeah? But we certainly know right now that when people are talking about either finding a new job or talking about leaving their job, it is because of that flexibility piece. So it's because they've had, not really flexibility, but because they've had this opportunity to see what work is like in a different perspective during the pandemic. People are like, actually, I've been able to do my job fine from home for 5 days a week. Why do I now have to go into an office? I can't make sense of it. And it's really hard for employers to find an answer to that because there isn't really one. So I think you have to remember that when we look at any research that's been done by any company, and there is lots out there, 80% of people want some form of hybrid working. 10% want to be in the office full time, 10% want to be remote full time. Everyone else likes their colleagues, would like to see them occasionally, but not every single day. And investing time and effort in understanding that and in understanding what that looks like for your business and what you can offer, I think if you can do that, that is going to be a huge, huge draw when it comes to attracting talent. And also when it comes to retaining talent, because what it says is we listen to our employees.
Yeah, and Harry, just to respond to that, because that's what McDonald's, for our corporate staff, they have been taking that approach is, yes, hybrid is the way that we appear to be going. How best can we make that hybrid model work as effectively as possible, given that McDonald's is very, very much a relationship company. The relationships that we have between the three legs of our stool, it's what drives our business. And so for us then, our challenge is for our frontline workers who obviously aren't able to work remotely, how best can we make their work environment somewhere where they almost enjoy going to work? And that starts with simplification, making their jobs easier, making sure the technology works, like you mentioned earlier. That's such an oftentimes ignored element of workplace experience. But in our restaurants, if something's not working, obviously that's going to put more pressure and stress on the crew who are working at that restaurant. So that's been one of our biggest focuses recently, is how can we make our frontline workers just feel like their jobs are a little bit more easier when they're there at work.
Yeah, thank you for that both. One more question from me and then I'll take some. So Harriet, you mentioned that people are likely to be less honest when they rely on you for their rent, which makes complete sense. And we know from our surveying that people typically say that they're leaving because they've got an opportunity to earn more money, but it's very often about the people they work for, which I think is just too hard to say, right? If you can avoid saying it, why would we all be that confrontational? I'd love to hear from both of you, maybe some tactical suggestions that you can provide for the audience today to try and maximize your brand, maybe some output or metrics or thoughts that you have, knowing that the people on the line that are listening are focused on the people who've left. Presumably, that's potentially a great source of insight about your employer branding. Might be tough. You know, Marks and Spencer's talk about their alumni being their harshest critics, but their biggest supporters. Love to hear from you both about how you can get the best from that pool of people to enhance your brand.
I mean, I can go first. I think the thing I would say is really think about, first of all, collect the data, right? So don't just think about, oh, we got their email address when they left, therefore we're fine. They might move, they might not check that email address anymore, it might get hacked, they don't have access to it, whatever. Think about how you can collect the data and keep them engaged so that you are constantly updating that and it is up to date and you have access to it. And that's fundamentally important if you want to talk to them about anything. And the second thing is really think about how, if you're going to start surveying your alumni, if you're going to start asking them for feedback, think about how you design those surveys. So I'm sure you'll do this anyway, but really it's an art. Get people who know the art in to help you and really design the questions so that you are getting feedback that you can act on, because there's nothing more frustrating than somebody giving you a piece of feedback and then nothing happens from it, right? So design it so that you're getting feedback that you're going to act on, and think of a way of thanking people for it. Very basic human relationship stuff, but show them that you're listening to them and thank them for their feedback.
Is it brave to be asking for feedback from people who've left? I mean, Harriet, you, before we get to Kieran, you focus on working from home. That's where you've done all your research. So there are probably people that you've done a lot of work around who've never really met that many people. And so you're asking them to pass comment on the brand or the culture or something else, and maybe they haven't had the right opportunity to imbibe it. Is it dangerous to ask people who've left for feedback?
It's not dangerous to ask people who've left for feedback. It's dangerous to rely on one person's opinion, right? So one person's experience, one person, what I always say when people ask me about feedback, I say, you know, feedback is one person's opinion. If it's 10 people's opinion, it's a trend, right? And you might want to listen to the trend. And so that's the thing that you should be looking for, is looking for the trends. So if what we're seeing is that actually you're asking everyone about their experience of your workplace, and everyone is saying some variation of it wasn't accessible, or actually I worked with a company once who said that they continually got feedback that people were ill, and what it was really was that actually they had terrible lighting and very bad ventilation. It was quite a simple fix, but so looking for that trend and being able to kind of pull it out and say, okay, what's really going on here? So I don't think asking for feedback is dangerous. I do think it can be brave, right? Because sometimes ignorance is bliss. But I think if you want to be a successful workplace in today's world, you have to be brave. You've got to be brave. And I think shying away from that is where people are going to run into problems.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I just add on to that real quickly. I echo everything that Harriet said, and it's not dangerous as long as you are prepared to act on the feedback that you're getting, because nothing is worse than asking a given population for their feedback on something and then doing nothing with the feedback that you get, which I think unfortunately happens more often than it should. So it's really going into that opportunity where you are approaching somebody at a very poignant moment in their employee journey with you, and being ready to say, okay, not only am I listening to you, but here's what I'm going to do about it. So that in the event that they do ever potentially want to come back, or if you want them to become a brand advocate, they remember that they felt heard and listened to.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we've got some customers that ask people a year after they've left, 6 months after they left, what software do you wish you had access to? What have you enjoyed at your new job that you wish you had experienced here? There's a lot to be learned from people who've left, because they no longer, as you said, Harriet, when people are relying on you for their living, then maybe they're a little bit more cautious about what they say. But after people have left, I mean, maybe they have the better memories, they remember who they enjoyed work with, and maybe they want to help you be a better business. And so presumably that's actually just a really rich source of consumer insights, essentially.
And also, I think, just that, but once you're out of a situation, I think sometimes we find it much easier to have clarity on it. So sometimes when we're in it, we're like, this isn't anything to do with that person. That person's being awful and I can't work with them. And then we go somewhere else and somebody else is awful and we can't work with them. We're like, maybe the correlating factor is me. And so actually when you've been out of something for a little while, it's then easier, as you say, to look back and remember all the stuff you loved about it. And also to look back and be like, oh, hang on, that was what was really going on there. And part of that's me and part of that's you, and this is the bit you can fix.
Yeah, and Kieran, how do you, and if at all, I mean, I know that McDonald's don't have a formal alumni network, but I also know that we all in businesses, we go to different pools of people for advice. Do you get that kind of feedback? And can you tell us a little bit more about because you have 1 million people. What does that 1 million people comprise? How many are those people that we all think in our head are the people that kindly get us some fries and a Diet Coke? We're in a bit of a rush or want a treat.
Yeah, so I mean, currently in the United States, I would estimate there's probably around 800,000 McDonald's restaurant workers presently. So when you think about how many alumni there are, that exponentially increases. In terms of the reach out, I think there are situations where on a given project, we might have isolated incidents of reaching out to certain alumni that we might have connections with via an owner operator, but I'll be completely honest, it's definitely an opportunity for us right now. We know that especially as things are changing so quickly and with an industry where turnover is traditionally very high, like the QSR industry, that alumni group should be one that we look to not just for our employer brand insights, but also our consumer insights as well. Just because as you think about how rapidly things change, that's the crew, or that's the group, especially if they've been recent employees of a McDonald's restaurant, they're going to have probably some of the most poignant and incisive insights into what we should be doing in terms of keeping our pulse on employer brand.
Thank you. And we've got an anonymous question here. How does employer brand strategy impact the bottom line of the company? Would staying in touch with alumni actually drive sales? I mean, Kieran, you obviously have flagged, of course, there's that intersection of employee and customer. Presumably everybody, whoever leaves you, plus their family and friends, is a potential source of sales and advocacy for you. I don't know if you've got anything to add from that. And then Harriet, whether you've got some feedback too.
Yep, I think I'll just say that the business case has been made many times over within McDonald's just for having excellent people practices. We have drawn clear lines to having the best people practices in a restaurant, also having the highest guest counts, highest comps, highest sales. So while we haven't drilled down specifically to the business case for alumni, I think it's pretty clear that the correlation of how strong it is at the highest level of people, that we would see similar results if we were to put a focus on alumni.
And ultimately, I suppose that makes it a comms chat. When we talked a lot today about people, we talked about employer branding. I mean, you know, obviously I think about this all day long, but it is a comms channel. And in life, you want to engage with all possible audiences about everything that matters. So, you know, ultimately, it's something that's relevant, no doubt, for you as employer branding, but also for your colleagues that are thinking about revenue-driven business parts too. Harriet, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I was, which is really, it's always really interesting to me that we kind of take apart people and revenue. And the reality is that it's your people that make the revenue, really and truly. Like pretty much every business, even if you're making something, you know, the burgers at McDonald's are great, right? Like I think we can say that they're fundamentally the reason people are going, but the people make it, right? How you get served, how your experience there, like the kind of feel of it, that's part of it. And I think that is the same for every single business. And so it's always interesting to me that we kind of separate people and revenue. And I think in terms of, you know, employer branding and revenue, definitely, right? If you have great employer branding, you are going to get the best people. You get the best people, you're going to have a better business. And in terms of alumni revenue, I think for me, what feels kind of obvious, and you are obviously the expert, Emma, so tell me if I'm wrong, but what feels obvious is that if you show the people in your business that you care about them beyond just being in your business, that builds deeper relationships. We know deeper relationships, better engagement, happier employees. The stats there, better engagement, happier employees, more money. And also beyond that, what you're doing is creating brand ambassadors who are potentially going to become clients, who are potentially going to recommend your business and your services, who might come back and work for you, who might recommend that somebody else works with you. It's all of that feels to me as though it's part of your business development and therefore part of your bottom line. I'm
like, you're doing my job for me. And actually, Harriet, I think we should be swapping here. I should be answering questions about working from home. We've got a couple more questions here that are anonymous, and we've got one that is very McDonald's focused, and I don't think you've got the answer to this necessarily, Kieran, but it kind of does tie into wages, so it's interesting. How useful is the Big Mac index, where the time taken to earn a Big Mac on the minimum wage is compared between countries? For example, it takes 30 minutes in the US, but 1 week in India. I mean, I guess that also ties into employee experience and different territories.
Yeah, so, and I might be misremembering my MBA econ classes, but I think the Big Mac Index, what it represents is just the purchasing power between two currencies in two different countries. But I think the question does highlight that competitive wage for us is extraordinarily important. In all of the surveys and the data that we have, we know that competitive pay is the most important thing for the McDonald's workers. The trick there, though, it's not the only important thing. And I think we're at a point in time, especially coming off of the pandemic, where competitive wage is almost greens fees in terms of it's an expectation. You've seen wage hikes, at least in the United States. Wages have increased significantly across all industries in the fight for talent. And so for us, given our franchise business model where we can't dictate pay for 93% of our restaurants, one of the most important things that we've done under the EVP portfolio is provide more in-depth competitive wage resources for our operators to help them better understand how to craft and create competitive wage strategies and philosophies, so that no matter what restaurant you are in McDonald's, the ambition would be that we have competitive wage all across the board. And I'm very happy to say that we have experienced tremendous growth in this area. I think our overall wages, they've been increased. It's like roughly 13% just over the past year, which is pretty significant and over the industry average right now. But it's just, it highlights the importance of not focusing just on pay, though, because I think there's a lot of companies out there that just think, hey, we can raise our minimum, or we can raise our starting wage by $5, $6, whatever, and that's going to solve all your problems. And I can firmly say that no, it is about much more than that. So it is a critical piece of the puzzle, but not the only thing that you should be considering.
Thank you very much. Well, I was going to share the results of our poll, and then one final question for you tied to that. Interestingly, 40% of people on the line have a mature alumni network. 14% of those joining us have a new one, so it's less than a year old, and 14% are thinking about one, which leaves just under 33% who don't have one at all. Really interesting. As time goes by, more and more people have a mature alumni network. The question I was going to end with is, and Kieran, actually, you set it up inadvertently, which is competitive pay is the #1 expectation for everybody. But from both of your research, from both of your careers, what is it that employees are most looking for in an employer brand? And I ask this knowing that people on the line are reminding people who used to work for them what is special about their organization and why they might want to come back. So we'd love to hear that from both of you.
Yeah, Harriet, I can kick it off if you don't mind. I think what I'll say is one of the most interesting things that we found was that people want the company to care about them, in the sense that it's not just about them, but the world around them. So I think we touched earlier on the idea that company and any brand these days has to make a public display of support for issues and causes that potential talent cares about. And so that's one thing that we've been very proud of at McDonald's recently, is just making a very vocal stand on important issues that are facing our nation and the globe right now. Because from an employer brand perspective, I think that is one of the most important things that people are looking for, especially coming out of the pandemic years and all of the changes that brought, is just making sure that the company is in tune to what their responsibilities are as a big brand.
I think that's really true. I think the competitive pay piece is really interesting, because we know that's traditionally the #1 thing people care about. There was a wonderful piece of research, and I can't remember where it was from, but I will look it up and I'll send it to you. You can send it around, Emma, that just, I think at the end of last year, suggested that people would be prepared to take up to a £31,000 pay cut in order to work flexibly, which is an astonishing amount of money, just the ability to be able to put your washing on a Tuesday afternoon, right? But I think what we might see in the coming years is this realization that actually what we really want from our employees is for them to understand that as employees, we come to work as part of our life, and that the blend between work and life is now really, really tight. And so I need you to see me as a human, and I need you to show me that you see me as a human. And if that means that you totally understand that I have to go and pick my kid up at 3:30 p.m, you understand that. If it means that actually you understand that I am going through cancer treatment and you want me to take that time off and you're going to look after me during that, that's important. It's the understanding that life is going on around work, as opposed to what I think we've traditionally come from, which is we walk through the office door at 9 a.m. and our life stops, and then we leave at 5 p.m. and our life starts again. And I think if employers can show that they understand that's not the case anymore, that it is all integrated, I think that will be the thing that makes employees genuinely feel that they are cared for.
Well, global causes and motivation for more human employers is a great point to end on. A few things. First of all, our next webinar is entirely focused on that. We will be focusing next time on the business consortium that Enterprise Alumni has pulled together in the UK, with more than 160 large employers coming together. Yeah, thank you, Harriet, to help refugees find jobs commensurate with experience. You know, if you are displaced through no fault of your own, wherever you are in the world, and I'm sure for you too, Kieran, it's really important that we help people restart their lives with jobs that give them prospects and meaning. And so we will be joined by Jumana Basecha, who is the CNBC anchor, who'll be asking questions to myself, the CEO of RefuAid, Anna Jones, Sarah Roberts, who's the head of talent at Mulberry, and Edmund King, who is the president of the Automobile Association, who are very much at the heart of this business consortium. Today, I need to thank Kieran and Harriet for joining us. As a McDonald's alumni, it was obviously fascinating to hear directly from Kieran about your employer brand, and frankly how much things have changed. I started my 16-year-old working life in that uniform and still have my badge very proudly with my 5 stars today. And Harriet, as an owner of your book, thank you for sharing your insights about how the world of hybrid work really kind of impacts employer branding. It's a whole different world when you can't stand in front of someone and really feel the energy of the people that I felt when I first started my working life. Thank you to everyone who joined us today for their questions as well. We'll send a follow-up with some notes. Thank you to Kieran's dog for being quiet, incredibly well behaved, as well as Harriet, who's sitting really quietly on her left-hand side. So that leaves me to say thank you very much, everybody, and thank you for your time.
Thank you all.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
Bye,
Have a great
both of
rest of
you.